This video is a continuation of the first style review video. I wanted to break them up into a couple of chunks just to give you all a chance to stop and process and think about the different components. For this part of the video, now that I've explained verbs in the first one and thinking about those verbs overall, I really want to focus in on looking at the sentence core and thinking about how we can use powerful verbs to help improve the style of each of the sentences. So for this activity, the task was to look at each of the sentences and define where the core sentence is, what the use of verbs is, and what the voice is. So looking at sentence A, there must be thorough preparation of specimens by laboratory personnel. Our first impulse might be, wow, there's a lot of stuff, and that's a good one. So for me as an editor, I see that there starting of the sentence and I recognize, hey, that's an expletive. I probably will be able to reorganize the sentence to start differently. But the other part that you want to then zero in on is the verbs. So what is the core sentence here? There must be thorough preparation of the specimens. That is the core of the sentence, essentially. And really the verb focuses on must be and preparation. Those are that whole thing together operates as the verb. So when we look at the voice, we can identify that it's passive voice. You have that to be verb. You have the past participle, preparation. And then you realize that the agent is actually missing. So there must be thorough preparation of the specimens by laboratory personnel. You have a passive voice sentence, essentially. So what you want to do then is to think about what needs to happen here. So to revise this, I would probably focus on the preparation. That's the key verb of the sentence. And so if I start by identifying that key verb, I can then build the sentence around that. So let's look at some of the other examples they provide here. Laboratory personnel must prepare the specimens thoroughly. This one is active voice. So we identify our verb, must prepare, and you notice there that there is no to be verb, so you can't have it be passive voice. In addition, the doer of the action, the people preparing, is in the subject position, so it's laboratory personnel. And then the object of the sentence, what they are preparing, is specimens. So here we have subject, we have verb, and we have our object. Thoroughly is a descriptor for how they are preparing, so it is an adverb. So it describes how something is being prepared. So there we have active. We have a focus on the key action. I like the sentence pretty well. It's clean, it's simple, it's to the point. If we go down to C, the specimens must be prepared thoroughly by laboratory personnel. Once again, we have passive voice. It's not very much different from A, except that there is no there are, there is. So it's a little bit stronger, but it's still in the passive voice. And I could make an argument that this might be the best sentence if, for instance, it's most important to emphasize the preparation of the specimen versus who is preparing it. So if you are, for instance, writing a method section, you most likely would say the specimens were prepared thoroughly, because that's emphasizing what was done versus who is doing it. If this is an instructional guide, however, you would probably want to emphasize who needs to do what, and therefore you would want to opt for an active voice sentence. So once again, we can look at this sentence. Must be prepared is our verb. Specimens is what is being prepared, but it's moved into the subject position. So that's a key that it's a passive voice. And then by the laboratory personnel is the actual doer of the action. And in this case, in a passive voice sentence, it's put into a prepositional phrase and is tacked on at the end of the sentence. You could potentially remove it and the sentence would still make sense. So on to D, preparation of specimens by laboratory personnel must be thorough. So here we have essentially a weak verb, and it's still passive voice. So preparation of the specimens, actually, I'm sorry, it is not passive voice, but it kind of looks like it. So preparation is not actually a verb here. It is what's called, it's a noun. It's operating as a noun. So remember in English, we have a lot of things that verbs can do, and sometimes they look like nouns and act like nouns. And this is one of those cases. So here we have actually preparation of the specimens, which is a prepositional phrase, by laboratory personnel, which is another prepositional phrase. All of this together operates as the subject. And what the problem here is you have this super long subject before you finally get to your verb, must be. So you might see a lot of this in your writing. It's a weak construction, partly because the verb is so far down. And then if you look at actually what the verb is, must be, it's not very specific or very powerful as a verb. Prepared is a stronger verb because it has a lot of meaning to it. Must be is not really, it doesn't have a lot of weight. So when we look at the question, do they all mean the same thing? Sort of. There's a little bit of subtle differences in emphasis, as we talked about. A lot of them emphasize the preparation of the samples or the specimens versus who is doing the preparation. And so those meanings can matter in the context depending on what your focus is. So you want to attend to that as well. In terms of which version is better stylistically, I would opt for B. A lot of you said C was stronger stylistically, and I think that in some contexts you might be right. But if you're looking overall at these sentences, I would say B is the most clear, partly because it's active voice and it has the fewest amount of words. The other thing, too, is that the relationship between the doer of the action and what is done is much clearer. And so in terms of clarity and plain language, B is the strongest choice. However, context always matters here. And so in some cases, C might be your better choice, partly if it's most important that you emphasize what was done versus who was doing it. So finally, I wanted to dive into chapter 15 with the style. One of the things I noticed was a hesitation to really hack at these sentences. And this is just because you're often used to editing what's there and making small changes instead of really drastically rewriting. So as you saw from video 1, you can't do this always in one go. It might take a couple of passes. But what will help is, again, to focus on verbs and to figure out the core meaning of the sentence. So looking at the first one, the focus of the test for experiment 2 was tangential to and not a direct approach to leadership. Whew. So a lot of you just kind of edited a few things out, but what you didn't get at was really the core meaning. And here, if we start looking, like, what is the sentence saying? Is essentially that experiment 2 did not approach leadership. So was tangential to and not a direct approach say the same thing? So you could probably get rid of one of them. The focus of the test for experiment 2, there's a lot there. And then finally, was is the verb. That's your core verb, weak verb, right? So where you can substitute something else in will make the sentence stronger. So one of the things I opted for was to say experiment 2 did not focus on leadership. So in this example, focus becomes my main verb. I very quickly get rid of anything extra. The meaning is still essentially the same. So experiment 2 did not focus on leadership. If for some reason it's important to say the test, experiment 2's test did not focus on leadership, you could include that in as well. I don't know that it's needed, but if, for instance, there's multiple tests in experiment 2, then you might want to indicate that. So there we take this long sentence and chop it down into just a few words. So you can see how to do that. So let's look at the second sentence. The major framework of her essay involves presenting a discussion of healthcare funding. So key ideas, we have major framework, we have healthcare funding. So when I think about who's the doer of the action, which would be her, whoever that is, or potentially her essay. Involves presenting a discussion. This is all verb stuff, although the only real verb is involves. Presenting a discussion is things that look like verbs but are not verbs in this case. But the key word here is discuss. So why not then make that the verb? So then you can say her essay discusses healthcare funding. So we get at the key ideas and we strip out the rest. You could probably add the major framework or say her essay primarily discusses, or the major framework of her essay it discusses health. You get into some more awkwardness when you start padding things into that subject. So you want to weigh as an editor whether or not it's useful to get rid of the major framework. On 3, some studies have revealed that there has been a small increase in mastitis cases involved with BST supplemented cows. So there's a whole bunch of stuff just to say mastitis increases, there's your verb, in BST supplemented cows. So there our sentence could be, some studies show an increase, some studies show mastitis cases increase in BST supplemented cows, or mastitis cases increase with BST supplemented cows according to some studies, or you can move it around in that way. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but you can see like you can get rid of the have revealed that there has been a small, that's a lot of stuff that you can just get rid of. So these final 2 examples. The expected results of the use of BST supplements is an increase in the profitability of the dairy producer operations. So again, let's cut to the heart of the sentence, which is probably increase in profitability. And obviously there's probably some ways to trim that down. Increase profits, perhaps, is a better way to say increase in the profitability. So BST supplements increase the profitability of dairy producer operations. There we get rid of this whole, the expected results and the use of. So BST, or you can say BST supplements, because it's an expected result. So dairy producers expect BST supplements to increase the profitability or their profitability. So there you get kind of that switch around. So if we want this to become our subject, so we could say dairy producer operations expect, so then you get expected results, expect BST supplements to increase profits. And then we get to that heart of that sentence. The reason why video vignettes are less used than lecture and teaching corporate ethics is because of the higher cost and less available resources. So once again, we have a whole bunch of subject before we get to our verb, and then we have just a simple is. It's a weak verb. What you want to think about is what is the core, which is probably this less used idea. So video vignettes are used less frequently than lecture in teaching corporate ethics because of the higher cost and less available resources. That's just my first pass. You might be able to continue trimming it down from there. So I hope this video helps highlight some of the ways that you can edit with attention to verbs, using the verb as the base to determine meaning in a sentence, and finding ways to cut out all of the excess from there. Don't be afraid to kind of hack at it, but also don't be afraid to maybe take a couple of passes depending.